James Bulger, at just 2 years old, was out shopping with his mother, Denise Bulger, in the city of Bootle, very close to Liverpool, England, when, around 4:00 p.m., she briefly took her attention off her son to get her wallet and pay for their purchases. That's when Robert Thompson and John Venables approached James Bulger, took him by the hand, and led him out of the shopping center. They walked around the city for about 4 kilometers. During the walk, they sporadically assaulted James. Several witnesses saw the three of them walking through the streets. James was crying a lot, but whenever someone approached, the abductors made up excuses, such as being brothers or finding him lost on the street and taking him to the police station. After walking around the city for a while, they took him to an area near a cemetery, where he was beaten with an iron bar and bricks, as well as kicked and stomped. The criminals also poured turquoise blue paint on his face, which they had stolen earlier that day, and inserted batteries into his mouth and anus. He suffered 10 skull fractures as a result of the iron bar hitting his head. The forensic pathologist in the case stated that James Bulger had so many injuries, a total of 42, that none could be considered the fatal blow. The two criminals then placed James, already deceased, on the railway tracks, hoping that a train would hit him and make his death look like an accident. His body was subsequently cut in half by a passing train. His mutilated and completely disfigured body was found 2 days after his abduction, on the railway line in the area. The police had no difficulty in finding the murderers or proving their involvement in the crime, as security cameras captured the act, and DNA tests conducted on the suspect's clothes matched the victim. The criminals were skipping school at the time of the crime, which they regularly did. Prior to kidnapping James, they had already stolen from several shops, and as one of them revealed, on that day they were planning to kidnap and hurt a child. The choice of the victim was completely random. In November of that same year, Venables and Thompson were found guilty of the crimes of kidnapping, torturing, and murdering James Bulger. The trial took place when the two perpetrators were already 11 years old. They served their sentence in a detention center for underage offenders until they were granted parole at the age of 18 in the year 2001. However, one of them later reoffended. Furthermore, when they turned 21, they were given new identities and the right to live anonymously for the rest of their lives. The parents of the criminals were also granted the same right and live anonymously. Since his parole in 2001, his identity has changed twice. First, because he intentionally revealed his real name to his friends, telling them he was a convicted killer, and the second time because his new name was leaked to the public. A few years after being granted parole, Venables was arrested for getting into a fight while drunk and for being in possession of cocaine. The justice system has recommended his release multiple times. However, in 2017, he was arrested again for possession of child abuse images and was once again sentenced to 40 months in prison in February 2018, almost 25 years after the murder of James Bulger. Currently, John Venables is out on parole and using another identity, making it impossible for others to identify him, and making it even easier for him to target new victims. The investigators who interrogated Thompson suggested that he was the leader of the attack, inciting Venables to participate. In 2010, it was reported that he was in a long-term relationship with a man who knows his true identity. Like John Venables, the new identity of Robert Thompson is protected by the justice system, and anyone who discovers or attempts to disclose his real name or even search for his address can face imprisonment. The English justice system overly protects the murderers at the expense of the victim, their family, and the entire society, which becomes hostage to criminals. Apparently, he has not reoffended since being released, but this information lacks reliability because the English justice system excessively protects psychopaths, making it difficult to investigate such cases. Often, impunity on the part of lawmakers occurs due to their own desire to commit such heinous crimes. However, lacking the courage to do so themselves, They see in the delinquent an opportunity for fulfillment, in addition to the empathy they share, resulting in lenient sentences to quickly return them to the streets. Society has far more psychopaths than people believe. In this case, the lawmakers have succeeded in their desire, as at least one of the psychopaths continues to act against society. J.C. Dugard, on June 10, 1991, at the age of 11, was walking alone to the bus stop near her home in California, where she always waited for the school bus. At that moment, a car stopped beside her, using a stun gun, and abruptly pulled the young girl forcefully, leaving her no time to react. The young girl's stepfather, Carl Probin, watched from the window. He immediately tried to chase the vehicle on a bicycle, but without success. The police were promptly called, and the search began. The search included dogs, planes, and numerous police officers. All attempts were unsuccessful. The police were accused of having failed multiple times in this case, which could have led to the girl's rescue. The main complaint is that they did not thoroughly investigate what was later concluded to be a crucial lead. The stepfather then became the prime suspect. He was accused by the police of being the kidnapper of his stepdaughter, which cost him his marriage and brought him contempt from society. "I was unjustly accused. I lost my marriage and my life. The police made me the only suspect and threw me into hell," stated Carl Probin, stepfather. The girl was taken to the house of her captors, about 270 kilometers away from where she was abducted. The people responsible for the crime were Philip Garrido and his wife, Nancy. They orchestrated the kidnapping together. It didn't take long for Philip to start raping J.C. Dugard frequently, resulting in the young girl's pregnancy. She had 2 daughters with her captor, with the first one being born when the victim was only 14 years old. Neither of the girls ever went to school or to the doctor. They were kept completely isolated, stated police officer Fred Collar in a press interview. The Garrido couple lived with Dugard and the 2 children in a residence in Antioch, California. While the Garrido couple lived in front of the street, Dugard lived with her 2 daughters in the back of the property, in an old and dirty shack. Behind the house, there was a shelter, tents, and small structures where J.C. and the girls spent most of their lives, stated police officer Fred Collar in a press interview. Philip Garrido had an extensive criminal record. He was on parole and was convicted of rape and kidnapping in 1971. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison at the time, but was released after only serving 10 years. He is also suspected of other crimes in the area, but without concrete evidence to incriminate him. Christine Murphy, Garrido's first wife, described him as a monster. According to Christine, he was a manipulative and aggressive man who once, in a fit of rage, tried to gouge her eyes out with a pin. Garrido claimed to have stopped abusing children after the birth of his youngest daughter. However, his version does not match reality. His last conviction for sexual crimes dates back to 1999, while his youngest daughter was born 5 years earlier. While Garrido was distributing religious flyers at the University of California, some police officers noticed suspicious behavior on his part. At the police station, it was discovered that the citizen was Philip Garrido, living on parole after serving a sentence for rape. His parole officer called him in, and he showed up for the meeting accompanied by the 2 children, his wife, and J.C., whom he introduced by the name Alyssa. The agent, who had already been to Garrido's house several times, had never seen Alyssa and the 2 girls before. He thought these people were suspicious, Collar reported. Even in the presence of the police, J.C. hesitated to tell the truth. It took multiple attempts by the investigators for the truth to come to light. While some report that J.C. suffered from Stockholm Syndrome, which is why she hesitated to speak, others believe that she was very afraid to tell the truth due to the brainwashing she had been subjected to by her kidnapper since she was abducted. Stockholm Syndrome. A person subjected to prolonged intimidation develops sympathy and even love or friendship for their aggressor. However, with a lot of persistence from the police, J.C. Dugard told the truth, and on August 27, 2009, she had the opportunity to finally return to the arms of her family. Just minutes later, she was already on the phone with her mother, and they had the chance to meet on the same day. J.C. Lee Dugard was 29 years old at the time of the rescue, while their two daughters were 11 and 15 years old. All three were in good health. Philip, accused of a total of 26 crimes, was sentenced to 431 years in prison, while his wife Nancy was sentenced to life imprisonment. But as part of a plea agreement with the prosecution, she will serve a 36-year sentence. Travis Victor Alexander was born on July 28, 1977, in Riverside, California. He and his 7 siblings had a difficult childhood as their parents were methamphetamine users. After the couple separated, the children were under the care of their mother, who would spend days sleeping and sometimes have explosive episodes due to the effects of drugs. In a blog created by Travis himself, he wrote about the hardships he endured with his siblings. There, he mentioned that there wasn't enough food, and they often had to eat spoiled leftovers. The children would go many days without bathing and slept on dirty mattresses on the floor, surrounded by cockroaches. They also suffered physical violence from their mother. Jody Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California. She worked as a photographer and met Travis at a business convention in Las Vegas in September 2006. According to one of Travis's friends, it was love at first sight. He mentioned that Travis had told him several times that he wanted to marry Jody and was deeply in love with her. The two dated on and off for a year and a half, often in a long-distance relationship, taking turns traveling between their respective homes in Arizona and California. Travis was a baptized member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormon Church. According to the rules of his religion, a couple should not engage in sexual activity before marriage, something that was not honored in their relationship. Travis's close friends had a negative opinion of Jody, stating that the relationship was unusually tumultuous and that she would have hysterical fits of jealousy. The idea that the couple should marry as virgins bothered Travis. He felt like a sinner for being involved with Jody. This, along with the distance and intense fights between the couple, led to a pretense breakup. Despite telling his friends that he was single, Travis continued exchanging messages and occasionally meeting Jody at his house. He seemed torn between his feelings and his religious doctrine. During this period, Jody was also baptized into the Mormon Church. She decided to move to Mesa, the same city where Travis lived, claiming that she was no longer interested in the relationship but was already accustomed to the Mormon community in the area. It was all an excuse. Jody started showing up at Travis's house uninvited, as she knew the password to his electronic lock. He began to feel stalked. When he complained to friends about the situation, he expressed that he no longer wanted to be with Jody and that she seemed unwilling to accept the end of their relationship. On the other hand, he continued to engage with and maintain contact with her. 6 months later, Travis entered into a romantic relationship with a woman from his church, Lisa. However, it didn't last long, as mysteriously, she began to be harassed at her home, with people knocking on her door and running away, and she also received threatening emails. Around the same time, Jody and Travis had a major fight, during which he allegedly called her a sociopath. He also told friends not to be surprised if one day he was found dead inside a refrigerator after a Jody's rage attack. Travis didn't show up for an important work meeting on the night of June 4. It was highly unusual for him to be careless with work commitments. On June 9, unable to reach Travis, a group of concerned friends went to his house. His roommates hadn't seen him for several days, but believed he was out of town and didn't think anything was wrong. After finding the key to Travis's master bedroom, his friends entered and discovered large pools of blood in the hallway of the main bathroom, where his body was found in the shower. During the emergency call, A police officer asked one of the friends if Travis had any enemies and if they could identify who had killed him. Without hesitation, they mentioned the name Jodi Arias. The crime scene was horrifying, to say the least. There was a lot of blood on the carpet, splatters on the wall. The bed was completely disarrayed, and the sheets had been taken away. Long dark hairs were found. A camera was inside the washing machine, and a bloody palm print was discovered along the hallway wall of the bathroom, containing DNA from both Jodi and Travis. Travis Victor Alexander was stabbed 27 times, shot in the head, and had his throat slit. In the camera, the police managed to recover deleted images showing Jodi and Travis in sexually suggestive poses, taken around 1:40 p.m. on June 4. The last photograph of Alexander alive, showing him in the shower, was taken at 5:29 p.m. that day. Photos taken moments later show Alexander bleeding profusely on the bathroom floor. These photos contain explicit content, so you cannot see them here, but they can be found on Google. When contacted by the police, Jodi claimed she hadn't been with Travis that night and hadn't seen him for at least 2 months. According to her, on the day of the crime, she was in Utah visiting a friend. When confronted with the photos, Jodi denied that it was her and suggested that the images had been altered using computer programs. The man whom Jodi claimed to have met in Utah was interviewed. He contradicted her story, stating that she arrived at his house only at 11 a.m. on June 5. At that time, Jodi's hair was dyed brown and she had injuries on her hands. She claimed to have cut her hands on broken glass while working at a restaurant called Margaritaville. Later, the police confirmed that there was no restaurant by that name in the area. Many pieces of evidence placed Jodi at the crime scene, and she couldn't evade it for long. In one of her many contradictory versions of her testimony, she claimed that 2 intruders broke into Alexander's house. A man and a woman supposedly forced their way in during the early morning, and after an intense struggle, ended up killing Travis, sparing Jodi because she pleaded with the attacker. In other accounts, she claimed to be a victim of domestic violence and said she killed Travis in self-defense. The prosecution argued that a .25 caliber bullet was found near Alexander's body, and a gun of the same caliber had been stolen from Jodi's grandparents' residence in Eureka the week before. She had staged the theft and used the gun to kill Travis. On the first day of her testimony, Arias claimed that she had been violently abused by her parents when she was around 7 years old. She seemed to strive to destroy Travis's image while preserving her own, alleging that he consumed child pornography. Forensic experts testified that they found no evidence of pornographic material on her computer. Jodi also revealed sexually explicit phone calls between the two, discussing anal sex and sadomasochistic practices, aiming to highlight that he did not follow the doctrines of his religion. Jodi Arias' trial was quite extensive, with dozens of court sessions. On April 13, 2015, the judge sentenced Jodi Arias to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Since 2016, Jodi has been housed in the Arizona Department of Corrections. She began her sentence in the maximum security Lumley unit of the complex, but has the possibility of being downgraded to medium security level. Stephanie Crow was only 12 years old at the time of the case. She lived with her parents, grandmother, and 2 brothers in Escondido, California. The girl's grandmother had the habit of waking her up early, and it was no different on the morning of January 21. Upon entering the room, she noticed that her granddaughter was lying on the floor, and as she approached, she saw that her body was drenched in blood. Stephanie had been stabbed 8 times, and nothing indicated forced entry or burglary. The victim's bedroom window was unlocked, but there were no footprints or traces of dirt suggesting an intruder. The door to the parents' balcony was also open, but it was customary for the family to keep it slightly ajar. The police were called immediately, and no murder weapon was found at the scene. Blood-stained clothing or items that could contain evidence of the crime were also not found. The clothes worn by everyone in the house that day were confiscated, and their bodies were examined for injuries. The parents and grandmother were accommodated in a hotel, while Stephanie's siblings were taken to a government shelter. The parents did not see their children for 2 days. Stephanie's 14-year-old brother, Michael Crow, was interrogated for hours by the police using the Reed technique without the presence of either of his parents or a lawyer. Reed technique. The technique is known for creating a high-pressure environment for the interviewee, followed by sympathy and offers of understanding and help, but only if there is a confession. Critics argue that the technique results in an unacceptably high rate of false confessions, especially from young and mentally disabled individuals. Michael Crow became the main suspect of the police. The crime scene seemed to suggest that the perpetrator knew the house and the victim, and was able to move in the dark without making any noise. Acquaintances said that the boy appeared distant after his sister's death and showed no tears or sadness. The police interrogation may not have followed the best approach. The officers even lied to Michael, claiming they had DNA evidence that made him guilty and that he had failed a supposed truth test, in addition to saying that his parents believed he had killed his sister. Michael denied any involvement hundreds of times, but at a certain point, he ended up confessing. He admitted to committing the crime, but said he couldn't remember the details, as if he was out of his senses at the time of the murder. That's why it's important to understand how a criminal process works. Michael Crow's 15-year-old friends, Joshua Treadway and Aaron Hauser, were also interrogated by the police. Hauser was a knife collector. His parents noticed that one of the items was missing from his collection. The next day, the missing knife appeared at Joshua's house. When questioned, he said he had borrowed it from a friend. He was continuously interrogated for 11 hours, from 9 p.m. that day until 8 a.m. the next day, with the police claiming that the knife was the murder weapon despite there being no DNA evidence. They interrogated him again 2 weeks later in a new 10-hour interview, during which Joshua gave a detailed confession of his involvement in the murder with the other 2 boys. He was then arrested. Based on Joshua's confession, Aaron Hauser was also arrested and interrogated. He did not confess and denied any involvement, but provided a hypothetical account of how Stephanie Crow could have been killed. The morning after the murder, the police also interviewed Richard Raymond Toot, a 28-year-old man with schizophrenia, who had been seen in the Crows' neighborhood on the night of the murder, knocking on doors and looking through windows. Several neighbors called the police to report the suspicious person. He had an extensive criminal record, regularly roamed the streets of Escondido, and did not receive treatment for his mental disorder. His clothes were collected, there were scratches on his body, and a cut on his hand. However, he was not considered a suspect. The police believed that he was simply suffering from the symptoms of his illness and would be incapable of harming a child. The focus of the police was entirely on Michael Crow. The 3 teenagers were charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder. A judge ruled that they should be tried as adults. DNA tests found 3 drops of Stephanie's blood on a shirt belonging to Richard Toot. Despite the defense claiming contamination due to careless police work, this completely changed the course of the case. On the first day of the trial, Richard Toot left the courtroom for lunch, and while eating, he managed to free himself from the handcuffs and left the court, boarding a bus. He was caught hours later. During the trial, the prosecution linked Richard Toot to Stephanie's murder, presenting circumstantial and physical evidence, including evidence that Stephanie's blood was on his clothes. The court sentenced Richard to 13 years in prison. He later had an additional 4 years added to his sentence due to his escape attempt. The families of the 3 boys sued the cities of Escondido. The Crows reached a settlement of $7.25 million in 2011. In 2012, Superior Court Judge Kenneth So made the rare decision that Michael Crow, Treadway, and Hauser were innocent of the charges, permanently dismissing the criminal case against them. Richard Toot appealed his sentence multiple times, alleging investigative failure, violation of fundamental rights, and issues with DNA evidence. He was granted a new trial, which began on October 24, 2013. In his closing arguments, his lawyer told the jurors that Richard Toot was never inside the Crow's house, and even if he were, he wouldn't have been able to find Stephanie's room in the dark. Furthermore, investigators did not find his fingerprints or DNA in the residence. He also stated that Stephanie must have been held down under a comforter to keep her quiet, while someone else stabbed her. Experts testify that the blood stains on Richard's shirts were not there when they were originally evaluated. The prosecution argued in their closing statement that Richard Toot was in the vicinity of the Crow's house on the night Stephanie was killed. He was knocking on doors and ended up entering the residence because he was looking for a woman named Tracy, with whom he had a falling out after the end of a relationship. On December 5, 2013, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty for Richard. A juror stated that there was no evidence that Toot was in the Crow's residence that night, and the jurors were concerned that the victim's blood might have gotten onto his clothes through contamination, which was the most significant factor influencing their decision. The case of Stephanie Crow remains unsolved to this day.